Indians do not exist. Indigenous peoples exist. Peoples with national, tribal, band, or community belonging exist. Peoples with relationships and obligations to land, water, and non-human relatives exist. Peoples with history, kinship, governments, and futurity exist. Hello, guys, gals, my gender fluid pals, and welcome to the Cozy Corner. Because I don't know about you, but I sure need one. Happy finals week to those who celebrate, at least for me right now. Um, the glasses will be on the top of my head because I know editing Megan would see the ring light glare and absolutely get pissed. So there's just going to be props now on the top of my head. So, the topic I want to yap about today, which may or may not be for a school project because it's finals week, is to discuss Wild West shows in the late 19th to early 20th century America and how they impacted the national identity of Indigenous peoples in this country. Hey team, editing Megan here, so you can see how dark it is outside. I just wanted to interject really quick. I use the term throughout the video, Native and Indigenous peoples interchangeably, kind of like synonyms. From what I could research, they both are kind of more terms for the groups as a whole, unless you're talking about specific peoples. And then, at least in the United States, Native is more qualified from what I found. But if I am incorrect, please let me know. The only time that I use Indian is in reference to the archetype. I don't know why I air quoted archetype, the archetype for Wild West shows. And even then, I try and still use Native American when discussing because I personally don't feel comfortable saying it. But, anyways, just wanted to let y'all know. Back to your scheduled programming. Actually, I'm so excited. This is like, Anyways, to preface, I am not of Indigenous descent, but I do recognize my obligation as a US citizen to learn Native and Indigenous history in this country because I do feel like we do not do it enough or at all, depending on which state you live in. As a military brat myself, I can attest to that. So, that said, this discussion itself will also be honed through a purely theatrical lens because I just have a future musical theater degree and a dream and a passion for learning. That said, I'm sure, looking at my script, I'm sure there'll be pieces of this history that I have missed, perspective that could be delved deeper upon. I will absolutely love to hear about if you would like to add in the comments, which I will happily browse. I just know that me personally, I was on a little bit of a time crunch, and so the information that I have found is within the quantity of time and the quality of sources that I could find. That said, let's begin. Okay, so the song you just heard, I don't know about you, but makes me think of like old-timey standoffs, Wild Wild West. Now, in that image, you have the cowboys, the sheriffs, the old saloons, the damsels in distress, and Native Americans. Now, as a white middle class American myself, I picture the stereotypical image of a Native American. I do not need to describe this image. I ask myself, why is that? For a country so keen on changing and developing, why are the peoples who first inhabited this nation seemingly stuck in the same time loop? They're not, obviously, but the national identity of what a typical US citizen imagines an Indigenous person to look like is sadly similar to the same image that was around the time of our country's founding. Again, I ask, why is that? May I introduce the subject of today's conversation, Wild West shows. So, background information on Wild West shows, because man, is it crazy. I might stick this to my nail because holding it might get heinous, but it's okay. Wild West shows were touring theatrical productions that were popular, and when I say popular, like outrageously popular and outrageously successful, in the late 1800s to early 1900s. I think they ended around like the 1930s, but still like trickled in and out. They were set up in that of a circus performance style where there were live demonstrations of horse riding, trick shooting, like Annie Oakley, who performed in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, and Buffalo Bill himself was a trick shooter, rodeo skills, and vignettes, which were dramatized historical reenactments. Now, similar to how circus shows were set up, the vignettes themselves, there were a cycle of a specific few that were super popular. And the ones that I consistently kept reading and reading about were the Battle of Little Bighorn, Custer's Last Stand, and the Siege of the Deadwood Coach. And the Siege of the Deadwood Coach varied on which company you were looking at, but it was basically just Native Americans attacking a stagecoach, and the cowboys and soldiers came to rescue the family inside the stagecoach, or the travelers or settlers, the white settlers inside the stagecoach. Oh my god. Sorry, I'm getting notifications. All those three specifically, and more of the others, were the involvement of Native Americans as the foes or savages who would attack the white settlers, attack the white soldiers, and be represented as the villains. And they were this like stereotypical like face paint, feathers, like that was their image. Also a part,
This I just wanted to say is a little side tangent.
also a part of the aspects that developed from Wild West theater and like the savage Indian stereotype was, or the noble savage, the ruthless savage, and the Indian princess. Noble savage, noble slash honorable savage, was the stereotype that this Indian was willing to die for something honorable, protected their family, but they're still against the like Catholic white correct ways. Ruthless savage basically sounds like what it sounds like. And the ruthless savage is what the runners of Buffalo Bill's company, Wild West Show company, wanted their indigenous performers to do, and basically even said like be natural, like that kind of thing. The Indian princess is an interesting stereotype because it combines the damsel in distress with the innocence of girlhood in a way of native and indigenous. Yeah, yeah. um, it was very white savior. It was like the white man saves the innocent indigenous girl and like shows the right way.
Side tangent about the archetypes is now over, and we will be back to talking about the Wild West show.
Now, the way that they publicized, the main way that they publicized these shows were obviously clippings in newspapers and advertisements, but they also had a whole parade. Like the company would ride on horseback through the center of town and be in full regalia, full costume, have all of their props, and it was supposed to like oh my gosh, this is so foreign from like the mundane going to my work. Like, who are these people? Now, the purpose of the shows themselves were to spark interest about the West. Because at this point, we are still in the era of manifest destiny. Ooh. And a lot of these shows were to get people to support the idea because it was bouncing back and forth of like, there were people who weren't in full support, who were just like kind of happy where they were. And then these shows came and were like, this is the real Wild West. And this is why we have to colonize this land because we need to save the peoples that inhabit this land because they just need us. Very white savior. Basically, exemplifying our right to travel and dominate the western land of the United States. So, that's the background. Now, back to what I was saying about Native American involvement. Their rules specifically were what I discussed. And it got me thinking the why. Like, why would this be the the avenue of performance or involvement for Native Americans? And from what I found, it reminds me of how Black performers were able to survive through minstrelsy or thrive in their way through minstrelsy in keeping their culture alive but having their own way and using their own influence to determine the flow of attention. So, and I quote, what I found is, it was the only vehicle through which they could continue practicing their cultural norms, spiritual beliefs, and language, which were being eradicated by the US. Brief historical background, we are now in the times of, well, we are in the times of, but the 1830s, since that was when federal law like organized reservations. And in 1868, because of the Indian Wars, Ulysses S. Grant was led to draw the conclusion that the best way to end the conflict was to assimilate native savages. Um, Mind you, the US governmental powers had been killing off bison as a starvation tactic, controlling the land, controlling stuff around indigenous peoples. Um, but we're also getting boarding schools because of that assimilation tactic now. It's when Richard Pratt was coined saying, kill the native, save the man. So we had reservations and boarding schools and Wild West shows going on at the same time.
Editing Megan again, really quick. In regards to when I referenced the boarding schools and the reservations and the Wild West shows, on top of the fact that their image was this, stereotype, it was also the fact that, US citizens were being fed this knowledge that, oh, the Native Americans are dying off, and we are sending them to these reservations because they have such few numbers, and this is where they could best survive. And so, on top of this stereotypical image of a Native American that US citizens were being given, it was also the notion that the numbers were just dwindling and that they won't exist anymore, which is obviously untrue as of, today's information. But that was just a side note that I realized I didn't add. But
So, with all of that said, Native American involvement was for these Wild West shows was a way for them to continue practicing their culture on their own terms while traveling, while performing for these audiences and having to step into these caricatures. And it is really interesting in that way of why I was thinking of minstrelsy similarly, of marginalized people keeping their culture alive on their own terms, um, which is really admirable and very inspiring in today's climate. All of that said, why today? Why, you know, think on it, discuss this topic? Like, why would this history be important? Great question, you ask. Because it was just in 2022 that the Cleveland Guardians changed from the Cleveland Indians and changed their mascot that used to be Chief Wahoo. That was less than 5 years ago. And it was only in 2021 when they were going. Hello, I think I'm very close to the mic. We'll see. It was only in 2021 that they banned face paint and headdresses from Progressive Field Stadium where they play. And I remember that being all over the news, and the argument of like that argument of like cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. There's a right answer to what that is, to what this was. I Whatever, we'll discuss. The use of that image, I have a definition. I forgot about this. According to Oxford Dictionary, red face is used to refer to the practice of wearing makeup and clothing to imitate the appearance of a North American Indian person, typically as part of a performance. Now, part of a performance. Let me gather my thoughts. I remember a lot of people being viscerally mad about this change. Like, oh, it's getting too woke. They're taking away history. We're honoring indigenous people through this mascot. Like, through image alone, maybe. But do you know the history of the land you walk on? Or is it just the picture that you're looking at? Because if it's through image alone, then you're not recognizing the history behind it. And the history behind it, I argue, ties back to Wild West shows. Now, there's like a whole lot that happens in between. Like, Hollywood had their spoof of Western films, but it's a very interesting. And granted, that happened then, and we've taken steps now as, the Cleveland Guardians are what they are now. And there's recognition and education and taking those steps forward. But from my theatrical lens, there could be more. Like learning more and getting more access to Indigenous theater specifically, or Indigenous works. Part of my research regarding setting up this whole discussion too was reading Off the Rails by Randy Reinholz, which is a really interesting read, as it was inspired by Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. And I think it's really interesting the way that the play went about, because it follows, watering the play down to a basic like 1 to 2 sentence summary. It follows a native boy who is sentenced to death because he there's a bug in my room, impregnated an Irish girl, and they were married through Pawnee tradition, but because the town is led and does not recognize Pawnee tradition as true marriage, it's because it's not Catholic, they assign it as grape and assault. So, the story follows that plot. And I was trying to do more research on Measure for Measure because I've read some Shakespeare plays, but I haven't specifically read that one yet. the idea itself is really interesting to take this like mainstream, really talked about playwright like Shakespeare and transform it into this piece of work by a artist who is a part of a marginalized community that I think personally should have their art recognized a lot more, and presented a lot of the ideas that I talked about. There's another one too. Hold on. But like another example is the Golden Age musical Oklahoma that everybody knows. Well, okay, everybody coming from a theater nerd. And if you don't know the show, you've at least heard songs from it. Oklahoma was inspired by whoa, hello. Oklahoma was inspired by Green Grows the Lilacs, which was written by Lynn Riggs, who was a biracial enrolled member of Cherokee Nation. That's the kind of history that I should be talked about more, should be explored more. And I understand in today's climate and where education is in the United States right now, it's already a tricky road to tread upon. I understand my privilege in getting to talk about something like this without having experienced the hardships. I am staring right at the I'm so sorry. I keep looking away. The privilege it is to talk about these experiences in this history without having to have lived the bigotry and discrimination. That's the word of said history. So, all that said, closing thoughts. Wild West shows are a really interesting facet of American performance history. In the same way that in the same regards of minstrelsy and how a heavily marginalized group of people were able to survive and uphold their culture through their standards, and were able to practice their own way, albeit most likely in secret and not for anyone else but themselves, and had to put on a facade for audiences to keep this image alive. Researching all of this was a really profound experience in learning just on all ends, recognizing and upholding, and just shedding light on information to understand that, and also doing my due diligence of making sure that like the sources that I'll cite at the end of this video do come from a mix of just generic sources. Hello, so sorry. Generic sources that I found, but also tracing it back to make sure it is from Indigenous voices and perspectives, especially from a theatrical outlook. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a fantabulous day. All my love. I don't know if I actually ended the video because I think my remote turned off. LMAO. I'm losing my train of thought. Okay. I'm also not breathing, I realize. Being on camera is hard, guys. Hello! This is embarrassing for me.